You ever stop and think about this? Every government on Earth seems to be drowning in debt. But if they're all borrowers, who exactly is the lender? It feels like a paradox, right? A giant global puzzle that just doesn't quite add up. Well, the answer is probably not what you're thinking, and believe it or not, it's been hiding in plain sight all along. So let's dive in and solve this.
Okay, first, let's just get a sense of the scale we're talking about here. The total amount of government debt floating around the globe is somewhere around $250 trillion. That's a 250 with 12 zeros after it. It's a mind-bending number, the kind that almost breaks your brain to think about. So how do you even begin to make sense of a number that big? Well, we compare it to a country's entire economic output for a year, its GDP. And when you do that, you see that the world's total debt is more than double everything the entire planet produces in a year. For the USA, the debt is hovering right around 100% of its economy. And then you've got Japan, which has soared to an incredible 230%.
And this brings us right back to our central mystery. With these kinds of numbers spread across pretty much every country, the question is impossible to ignore. If everyone is on the hook for this money, who's on the other end of the deal? Who holds all the IOUs? Who are we all paying back?
To solve this puzzle, you gotta go back to the beginning. We need to find the first clue, and that means we have to travel back in time, to the exact moment modern government debt was basically invented. So let's head to the late 17th century. See, before this time, the whole idea was a non-starter. I mean, sure, a king could borrow money, but would you lend your savings to a guy who could just decide not to pay you back, or worse? Creditors knew the risks, so if they were even willing to lend, they demanded sky-high, loan shark-level interest rates. But then, in 1694, everything changed. England was stuck in a super expensive war with France and needed cash fast. So Parliament did something revolutionary. They created the Bank of England, and with it, something totally new. A loan backed not by the whims of a king, but by the credibility of the entire nation. And here's the genius of how it worked. Regular people and rich merchants all pooled their money, about £1.2 million, and loaned it to the government. In return, they got these new things called government bonds, which were basically fancy IOUs that paid 8% interest. And here was the killer innovation. Repayment was guaranteed by future tax money. All of a sudden, this wasn't some risky bet. It was a secure, tradable asset. This completely flipped the script on debt. Suddenly, going into debt wasn't a sign that a king was desperate. It was a powerful financial tool. It actually became a mark of a nation's stability and trust, a badge of credibility. So, this new financial weapon is now on the table, and you know it's going to get used. This ability to borrow huge sums of money started to dramatically reshape the world, especially on the battlefield. The money trail gets really interesting here. I mean, just look at Great Britain during the long wars against Napoleon. By 1815, the government's debt had ballooned to £1 billion. That was 200% of the country's entire GDP back then. It's an astronomical sum, but that's the money that paid for the victory and ultimately built a global empire. And here's the really crucial part. Britain never defaulted. It paid its interest on time, every time. That built enormous trust with lenders. And that trust, that credit, is what allowed it to fund the most powerful navy in the world and become the dominant economic power of the 19th century. Now let's hop across the Atlantic. The brand new United States was facing its own financial nightmare. Right after the Revolutionary War, the young country was on the hook for nearly $80 million in war debt. It was an almost insurmountable figure, the kind that could have crushed the new republic before it even got going. But its first Treasury Secretary, a guy named Alexander Hamilton, had this absolutely radical idea. He said, hey, instead of running from this debt, let's embrace it. Let's treat it like an asset. He convinced Congress to promise to honor every single bond, and in doing so, he established the new nation's credit for the whole world to see. Okay, fast forward to the 20th century, because this is where our mystery really deepens. The two world wars took this idea of national borrowing and just put it on steroids, on a global scale. Suddenly, nations were tangled up in this incredibly complex web of IOUs that would end up lasting for generations. Just look at these numbers for Britain's debt. Before World War I, it was £650 million. By the end, it had skyrocketed by more than tenfold to $7.7 billion. After World War II, it was over 200% of GDP again. And you start to notice who the new key creditor is, the United States. It basically became the world's bank. And if you want a sense of just how long these debts can last, get this. Britain was still making payments to the United States and Canada for its World War II loans as recently as the 2000s. That is just incredible. These are promises that literally span entire lifetimes.
Of course, the US wasn't just a lender. It had to borrow massive amounts of its own money to win the war too. Its debt hit 106% of GDP in 1946, the highest it's ever been. But thanks to an incredible boom of economic growth, they managed to slash that ratio all the way down to just 23% by 1974. It just goes to show you that these numbers don't always go in one direction. Which brings us all the way back to today, and to the final piece of our puzzle. Now that we've traced the history of debt through centuries of wars and empires, we can finally solve the paradox we started with. All right, let's ask the big question one last time. If every government owes an unbelievable amount of money, who is the great global lender that's collecting all the payments?
Well, the simple answer is there isn't one. There's no single big bad lender hiding in the shadows. The clue is in the very definition of government debt. It's a promise a nation makes to pay back lenders. And as it turns out, those lenders are way closer to home than you'd think. So who actually holds all this debt? It's a huge spread out network. A huge chunk of it is held by regular citizens who buy government bonds. That might even be you through a retirement account. It's held by giant pension funds and insurance companies that need a safe place to park money so they can pay out our retirements and insurance claims down the road. It's corporations, and it's even the nation's own central bank. Yes, of course, foreign governments are in the mix, but they're just one piece of a much, much larger picture.
And this right here is the final answer. National debt isn't some external monster that we owe to some faceless entity. It's a giant mirror. A huge portion of a country's debt is actually money that it owes to itself, to its own people, its own companies, and its own future retirees. It's a complex web of promises that we've all made to each other. So, we've solved the mystery. There's no single creditor. In a very real way, the creditor is us. Which leaves us with one final and maybe much deeper question to think about. If this entire global financial system is really just built on a foundation of promises, what happens when that trust starts to break?